Squiz Kids acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we podcast, the Turrbal and Kombumerri people.
Good morning and welcome to the Squiz Kids Olympic Sprint, your quick as a flash update on the Olympic highlights that happened in Paris overnight while you were sleeping. It's Tuesday, July 30. I'm Bryce Corbett. You ready to race through it? On your marks, get set, go! It was a glorious gold-silver double for Australia in the swimming pool this morning after Molly O'Callaghan just beat her teammate and rival Ariane Titmus in the final of the women's 200-metre freestyle this morning. After trailing Arnie for most of the race, Molly pulled away in the final 50 metres to touch the wall a couple of hundredths of a second in front of her Aussie teammate, setting an Olympic record in the process. Speaking after the event, an emotional Molly said, "You have to accept the challenge at the end of the day. You can either run or you can fight, and I chose to fight. Not since 2004 when Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett claimed gold and silver in the same race at the Athens Olympics has Australia had a 1-2 win in the pool. Molly O'Callaghan, Squiz Kids salutes you." It was a beautiful story of a man and his horse at the Chateau de Versailles last night after Queensland's Chris Burton claimed the silver medal in the equestrian. Equestrian are the events that take place on horseback. The former farm boy from Bree-Maru near Dalby was ranked 151 in the world going into the Olympics, but thanks to his glorious horse Shadow Man, he pulled off a stunning performance in the grounds of the Palace on Paris's outskirts. Speaking afterwards, an emotional Chris said, "I honestly think he's the best horse in the world." Aww. The Aussie Women's Rugby Sevens team continued their winning form last night at the Stade de France Stadium in Paris, beating Ireland by 19-14. The dynamic duo of Gold Coast sisters Tegan and Maddie Levi combined on field to help seal the deal for our world champion team to get through their pool stage unbeaten. They have their quarterfinal match this morning at 6:30 a.m, just as this podcast goes to air. Come on, Aussies! And so to the medal tally. At the time of going to air, after 3 days of competition, Japan is on top of the overall medal count with 6 gold medals. Australia is in third position with 5 gold. Woohoo! Only just trailing China, also with 5. Our great sporting rivals, the United States and Great Britain, are in 6th and 7th position respectively. And that's the Olympic Sprint for today. Now it's time for today's Squiz Kids shortcut on the modern Olympics. Your 10-minute deep dive into the history of this amazing event that's playing out in Paris as we speak. Enjoy!
This is a Squiz Kids podcast. Your fresh take on what's happening in the world around you.
They started way back in 1896. They were the brainchild of a French historian, and today they're the biggest sporting event in the world. This is your Squiz Kids shortcut to the modern Olympic Games, the podcast where we dive into the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the big news stories. I'm Christy Kijarina.
And I'm Bryce Corbett.
Bryce, I'm so excited to be talking about the modern Olympics today. Have you been watching? Bryce! Bryce!
What?
Wake up!
What?
We're recording a podcast!
Where am I?
Bryce! Why are you napping now? I mean, we're meant to be recording a shortcut all about the modern Olympic Games.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I've just been staying up so late and watching the Olympics, but for research purposes.
Oh, well, I guess you're not the only one because billions of people from all over the world are expected to tune in over the coming days to get a taste of the amazingness that is the modern Olympic Games.
That's right, Christy. And thanks to all of the TV cameras beaming the action live from 35 different venues, we can see everything that happens.
We can, and I guess you're right, but they're very different from the first modern Olympic Games that were held in Athens, Greece, 128 years ago.
They most certainly are, and today we'll be talking you through why the Olympics were rekindled, who competed in the early modern Olympic Games, and how some of the Olympic traditions that we're so familiar with today came to be. So, grab your running shoes, get on your marks, get set, and let's go.
And listen carefully, there's a squiz at the end.
Why?
Bryce, as we learned in our last podcast, the very first Olympics happened in Greece, way back in ancient times.
Yep.
The historians aren't exactly sure why they disappeared, but they were gone for about 15 centuries.
That is a very long time to not be around. So why did they come back?
Great question. A French historian named Pierre de Coubertin was responsible for getting the show back on the road. And he had a few reasons for wanting to form an international Olympic Games.
Yep.
Firstly, he wanted there to be more sport in schools and thought a major international athletic competition would get more young people involved in physical activity.
That is some pretty intense PE, I would suggest.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly, he knew that in ancient Greece, a truce, which is a pause in the fighting, like a kind of temporary peace, was called during any conflicts in order for the Olympic Games to go ahead. And he really liked the idea of a modern Olympic Games promoting the idea of peace between our nations.
That is such a great reason.
Yeah.
And thirdly, he also thought that athletes from different countries coming together would promote better international relations, meaning that different countries would get along together better.
So, with all of these excellent arguments, Pierre de Coubertin convinced authorities in Greece, the home of the ancient Olympics, to hold the first modern Olympic Games.
Now, hold on a second, Bryce. Before you start imagining thousands of athletes from hundreds of countries, remember, it was 1896.
And I guess things might have been a little bit different 128 years ago.
Yeah.
So, Christy, who exactly did take part?
Who?
Well, Bryce, just like the ancient Olympic Games we spoke about last time, women were still excluded from competing in the early modern Olympic Games.
That is crazy. Get with the program Olympics. So it really wasn't all that modern, was it?
No, it wasn't. And at this point, all the athletes were pretty much from Europe except for a few Americans. And more than half of them were Greek.
Oh.
Makes sense, kind of.
Does.
Still, it was the biggest international sports event up to that point, with 240 athletes from 14 different countries around the world competing in just 9 sports.
And guess what, Christy? Australia was in the mix right from the start.
Whoa.
Indeed, a 23-year-old accountant from Melbourne named Edwin Flack, who was working in London at the time, decided to take a little detour to Greece to compete in the first Olympic Games. And boy, did he make it count. He won not one, but 2 gold medals in the 800-metre and 1,500-metre races. And he even tried his hand at the marathon and tennis because, well, I guess he thought he was there and he might as well.
Oh, wow. That's right, Bryce. And he also kept it a secret from his boss, thinking that taking time off to compete in sports wasn't the best idea. How times have changed.
No kidding. Now, by the time the second games rolled around in 1900, women were allowed to enter some events, but the first Australian women didn't compete until 1912.
Yeah, that's right. In the 1912 Games in Stockholm, Sweden, Aussie swimmer Fanny Durack made a splash by winning the gold medal in the 100 yards freestyle, setting a world record with Minna Wiley right behind her, another Aussie, for the silver.
Wow, that's so cool. And this year, for the very first time in history, there are an equal number of men and women competing in the Paris Olympic Games.
Woohoo!
And get this, 55%, so more than half of the Australian team, are women. Go get 'em, ladies.
Yay. And speaking of inclusion, the first official Paralympic Games for athletes with disabilities weren't held until 1960 in Rome. So they were initially started by a doctor after World War II when lots of soldiers returned home with serious injuries.
Yeah, that's right. When the Olympics were held in London in 1948, Dr. Ludwig Guttmann organised a team of 16 servicemen and women in wheelchairs to compete in an archery competition during the official games. Now, it was called the Stoke Mandeville Games, named after the hospital that they were in, and they were held every year in England.
Cool.
Since 1988, though, the Paralympic Games have always been held in the same place as the Summer Olympic Games.
Bryce, we have covered so much already today.
Yes, we have, Christy, but when I think of the Olympics, I think of the 5 coloured rings, the Olympic flame, and of course those crazy mascots. So, how did all those Olympic traditions come to be?
How?
So, Bryce, let's dive into some of the coolest Olympic traditions, starting with the medals.
Yeah, cool.
Did you know that the winners at the first modern Olympics in 1896 didn't get gold medals?
What?
I know. They got silver ones along with an olive branch, just like in ancient Greece.
Oh, okay.
And in the 1900 Olympics, most winners got cups or trophies.
No way. So when did they start giving out gold, silver and bronze medals?
So that happened in 1904. But here's a fun fact. The gold medals are made mostly of silver.
Oh.
They're only plated with a thin layer of gold. Oh, yep. And this year, for Paris 2024, the medals are extra special.
Okay.
So they're cut in a hexagonal shape
Yes.
to represent the shape of France. And get this, each one has a piece of iron from the Eiffel Tower inlaid in it. How cool is that?
That is very cool. But don't worry, people, the Eiffel Tower isn't missing a whole lot of iron.
Oh, good.
The medal was kept when renovations were done over the past few decades.
And what about the Olympic torch? Where does that come from?
Good question. Now, the torch is another ancient tradition. Back in the ancient Greek Olympics, a flame was kept burning throughout the Games. Now, this tradition was revived at the Amsterdam 1928 Olympics.
Right.
Now, the Olympic torch is ignited in Olympia, Greece, using the sun's rays. It then travels all the way to the host city in a massive global relay and is used to light a big cauldron that stays burning for the length of the Games. How the final lighting of the cauldron will be done is always a big secret and always a great part of the opening ceremony.
It certainly is.
One of the most famous lightings, of course, was in 1992 in Barcelona.
I
Remember? When
Yep.
an archer shot a flaming arrow into the cauldron and set the Olympic flame alight.
Amazing. I'm going to pop a video in the episode notes of that.
Cool.
So that was definitely one for the history books. But now let's talk about those gorgeous Olympic mascots.
Oh, yes.
So ever since a little character on skis first appeared at the 1968 Winter Games, mascots have been a really fun part of the Olympics.
Sure have.
And they're mainly designed to market the Games to a young audience.
And of course, this year's mascots for Paris 2024 are the Phrygian caps. Now, they're named after the traditional French liberty caps, which are symbols of freedom and revolution in France. Now, these mascots look a little bit like little red hats with friendly faces, and they're full of character. They're even designed to look like they are always on the move, just like the athletes.
They're really cute, Bryce. The Phrygian caps are a nod to French history, and they're gorgeous.
Yeah.
But finally, we come to the Olympic rings, one of the most recognisable symbols in the world. So they first appeared in 1913 and they were hand-drawn by Pierre de Coubertin himself at the top of a letter that he'd written.
Oh, wow.
He said that they represented the meeting of athletes from 5 continents.
Hang on a second. 5 continents? But aren't there 7 continents? North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia and Antarctica?
Oh, well done, Bryce.
Thank
Good
you.
points on the geography.
Thank you.
Yes, that's right. So de Coubertin referred to the Americas. So both North and South America are actually sharing a ring.
Uh-huh.
And Antarctica, well, it doesn't have any permanent human inhabitants.
Right.
So no athletes from there.
Right.
Sorry, penguins, no ring for you, even though you are really good at swimming.
They are indeed. I would love to see a penguin 100-metre race. That would be good.
Amazing.
So there you have it, folks. As you're watching the Olympic Games over the coming days, you can tell your friends and family all about the fascinating history of the modern Olympic Games. Or just send them a link to this podcast.
Time for the quiz.
This is the part of the podcast where you get to test how well you've been listening. Question number 1. Where were the first modern Olympic Games held? That's right, they were held in Athens in Greece.
Question number 2. What was the name of the first Aussie to compete in the Olympic Games? Did you say Edwin Flack? Well done, people.
Well done indeed. Question number 3. What is the name of the red cap that the mascots for this year's Paris Olympic Games are based on? Well, 10 points to you if you said the Phrygian cap, and even more points if you pronounced it properly, because I'm not sure I just did.
So many points. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored the who, what, when, where, why and how of the modern Olympic Games. Teachers, there are excellent classroom resources related to this topic on the Squiz Kids website, and there's a link to them in the episode notes.
Now get out there and have a most excellent day.
Over and out.